name is Stephanie Still, and this is my experience with religious pluralism. I will begin by telling you a little about my religious background. My grandfather found his life calling at the age of 23 when he became a pastor in a small town in Finland. He preached all over the country for many years, making very little money doing so. Money was never a motivator for him, however. He was doing this job purely out of his commitment and love for God. My grandfather met my grandmother when she was singing in the choir at one of the churches he was preaching at. They fell in love and eventually got married. For the next few years, my grandfather continued to preach all over Finland, this time with my grandmother by his side. A couple of years later, there would be two new people accompanying them on their travels, my mother and her sister. With the addition of kids, it was hard for my grandparents to travel as much as they wanted to. My grandfather began feeling a strong pull and desire to preach and spread the word of God elsewhere, outside of Finland. When my mother was 13, my grandparents packed up their things and moved to Vancouver, BC. My mother was understandably raised in a very Christian household. Her adolescence was filled with learning English and spending hours at church on the weekends while she sat and listened to my grandfather preach the same service back to back to back. My mother learned English very quickly. She graduated high school and attended university in Vancouver. One thing she loved to do in her free time was ski. My mother met my father at a bar in Whistler, Canada, a ski resort only a few hours north of Vancouver. My father was from Bellevue, Washington, and was visiting Whistler to go skiing with his friends for the weekend. After a couple of years of commuting across the border to see each other almost every weekend, my parents finally decided to get married. My grandfather was even the officiant at my parents' wedding, and so my mother moved to Washington, leaving her parents and sister behind in Vancouver. Unlike my mother, my father did not come from a religious background. He has told me before that he believes in a higher power, but he is not exactly sure what. He believes there is something greater than us out there, which is most likely why he was not opposed to my mother teaching my sister and I about Christianity. Religion was somewhat prevalent in my life when I was younger, but definitely not to the extent of my mother's upbringing. The times that I noticed religion was the most present in my life was when I would go to Canada to visit my grandparents, aunt, and cousins. We would go to church on Christmas, Easter, and the Sundays that we were in town. We would say grace before our meals and then listen to my grandfather sing worship songs while he played the piano or strummed his guitar. Religion became something that I associated with my extended family because we would never really actively practice it at home. At a young age, this difference of religion between my home in Washington and my family time in Canada sometimes got confusing. My mother explained to me later in life that it was because she didn't want to force Christianity upon me and my sister like it was forced upon her. She didn't like the stigmas that came along with being a preacher's daughter and how she was sometimes expected to act as a young girl. My mother is still a full believer of her faith, but she wanted my sister and I to be able to see her perspective as well as my father's and then choose for ourselves. The first time I ever experienced any sort of diversity of religion was when I was around the age of 8. Up until then, I had only ever thought there was one religion, Christianity, because that's the only one I ever somewhat practiced or grew up with. My best friend in elementary school's name was Megan. She would consistently go to church every Sunday morning and Wednesday night. Megan's family is Roman Catholic, although I did not know that at the time. I had always assumed Megan was Christian, just like me, because when I would go over to her house, I would see decorative crosses hung up all over. It wasn't until Megan asked me to go to church with her one evening that I realized that there was more than just one religion in the world. The church Megan attended was nothing like I had ever experienced. As we stepped through the front door, I saw people dipping their fingers in a bowl of holy water and making the sign of the cross on their chests. I had never done this before, and it made me uncomfortable as an 8-year-old to think that I would have to do something I didn't understand. However, as we entered, I locked eyes with the pastor. I think he noticed I looked confused because I vividly remember him welcoming me with a big smile and telling me that I didn't have to do it if I didn't want to. As we sat through the service, I was shocked at how solemn all the music sounded because the church I usually went to in Canada played mostly upbeat Christian rock music. I told my mother when I got home about the experience I had, and that is when she informed me that Megan's family was Catholic, a different form of Christianity, as she called it. This idea was difficult to understand at first, but even so, that experience with Megan and the conversation with my mother was the start of my understanding of religious diversity and the differences in beliefs within the world. I began to notice all over my hometown not only the diversity of religion, but religious tolerance and pluralism. I live in Redmond, Washington, a suburb about 20 minutes out from Seattle. Redmond is home to some major companies, including Microsoft and Nintendo, bringing many immigrants to the Pacific Northwest, and with them, their religious beliefs. As I grew older, my elementary school and middle school would teach us some basics about different religious beliefs, like the differences between Christmas, Hanukkah, and Kwanzaa. But it wasn't until I entered high school that I really began to notice and truly understand the diversity and pluralism within my hometown. In my 10-minute drive to school, I would pass Timberlake Christian Church and St. Jude Catholic Church. If I decided to take the back way to school, I would pass the Evangelical Chinese Church of Seattle, which is right across the street from the Muslim Association of Puget Sound. Driving a bit further, I would even see a Church of Scientology right next to a public park in the middle of town. As I entered my first period at 7:30 a.m., groggy and tired, I would sit next to my friend Sydney, who had already been up for 2 hours because she attended seminary every morning before school at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints right across the street. As I walked through the halls, I would pass posters saying, "Have a great holiday break," my high school's attempt at being inclusive of all beliefs. For lunch, I would head down to Whole Foods and browse their buffet. The Indian population in Redmond grew so rapidly that our Whole Foods replaced one of their buffets entirely with traditional Indian food. You see, religious pluralism isn't just about living side by side with each other. It is about evolving as society evolves, accommodating these changes, and giving everyone the dignity to believe what they want to believe. No matter what religion you follow, I believe everyone in the Pacific Northwest can connect with each other by appreciating the beauty of having an ocean to our left and mountains to our right. Redmond, Washington is a place that embraces all cultures, and I'm proud when I tell people where I'm from.